"Is she even family?" someone whispered at Thanksgiving, so I stood up and carved the turkey in my own house. The words hit me like ice water in my veins as I stood in the doorway of my own dining room, watching my husband's family gather around the table I had spent 3 days preparing. 22 people crowded into our home in suburban Atlanta, the smell of roasted turkey and sweet potato casserole filling the air, and somehow I had become the outsider in my own house. My name is Maria Santos, and after 12 years of marriage to David Mitchell, I thought I had earned my place at this table. I was wrong. The whisper had come from David's sister, Patricia, her perfectly manicured hand covering her mouth as she leaned toward their mother, Helen. But the acoustics in our dining room carried every cruel word straight to where I stood holding a fresh batch of homemade cornbread, still warm from the oven. "I mean, she tries so hard with all this Mexican food mixed in," Patricia continued, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "But this is supposed to be a traditional American Thanksgiving. Why can't she just make things normal?" Helen nodded knowingly. David could have married anyone. That Johnson girl from his law firm was so lovely, and from such a good family. My hand started shaking, and I nearly dropped the basket of cornbread. 12 years. 12 years of Thanksgivings where I'd cooked for 2 days straight, transforming our home into a warm, welcoming space for people who apparently saw me as nothing more than an intruder playing house. I backed into the kitchen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the football game blaring from the living room. Through the serving window, I could see David laughing with his cousins, completely oblivious to the conversation happening just 10 feet away. He looked so relaxed, so at home, surrounded by the people who had known him since childhood. And there I was, the Mexican woman who tried so hard, but would never quite belong. The irony wasn't lost on me. This house, our house, was in my name. I had inherited it from my grandmother Rosa 3 years ago, a beautiful 1920s craftsman in Virginia Highland that she had somehow managed to buy and maintain on a seamstress's salary. When we moved in, David's family had been impressed by the location, the hardwood floors, the vintage charm. But they conveniently forgot that it came from my side of the family when they wanted to make me feel small. I set the cornbread on the counter and leaned against the sink, looking out at the backyard where Abuela Rosa used to tend her garden. She had been 4 feet 11 inches of pure determination, immigrating to Atlanta from Guadalajara in 1963 with nothing but hope and an 8th-grade education. She had cleaned houses, taken in sewing, saved every penny, and somehow built a life of dignity and respect in a city that wasn't always welcoming to people like her. "What would you do, Abuela?" I whispered to the empty kitchen. But I already knew. Rosa Santos had never let anyone make her feel small in her own space. The sound of chairs scraping against hardwood pulled me back to the present. They were sitting down for dinner, and I was expected to serve them. As always. I walked back into the dining room with the cornbread, forcing a smile as I took my designated seat at the far end of the table, the end closest to the kitchen, where I could pop up easily to refill drinks and fetch forgotten items. David sat at the head of the table, as he had for the past 12 years, with his mother Helen to his right in the place of honor. "Let's say grace," David announced, reaching for his mother's hand. As Helen launched into a lengthy prayer thanking God for family and traditions, I found myself studying the faces around the table. These people who had eaten my food, slept in my guest rooms, borrowed my car when theirs was in the shop. David's brother Mark, who had asked me to co-sign his business loan last year. Patricia, whose kids I had watched every summer for free while she went to her book club meetings. Cousin Jenny, who had lived in our basement for 6 months when she lost her job. All of them holding hands in a circle of gratitude while whispering about whether I truly belonged. "And Lord," Helen continued, "we thank you for bringing us all together in this beautiful home." She paused there, and I waited for the acknowledgement that never came. No mention of whose grandmother had worked 3 jobs to buy this house. No recognition of whose hands had spent the last 3 days making everything perfect for their comfort. "Amen," everyone chorused. As the food began circulating, the conversation turned to family memories, stories I had heard 100 times about David's childhood, about holiday traditions that went back generations, about people I would never meet because they existed in a time before me. "Remember when David was 8 and he tried to carve the turkey himself?" Uncle Bob chuckled, passing the green bean casserole. "Nearly cut his finger clean off. He always was determined to be the man of the house," Helen said proudly, patting David's arm. Even after his father passed, he stepped right up to take over the family traditions. Patricia laughed. Some things never change. He's still the one who carves the turkey every year. I watched David puff up with pride at their words. The man of the house. The one who carries on traditions. The turkey carver. Except David had never actually carved our turkey. For 12 years, I had been the one to get up at 5 a.m. to put the bird in the oven. I had been the one to baste it every hour, to check the temperature, to time everything perfectly so the skin would be golden and the meat would fall off the bone. And yes, I had been the one to carve it, plate it, and carry it to the table while David sat in his chair accepting compliments for my work. The turkey is incredible this year, Mark said, taking another slice. David, you've really outdone yourself. Well, I had help, David said with a modest laugh, not bothering to specify what kind of help or from whom. Help. 12 years of marriage, and I was help. The conversation moved on to other topics: Patricia's upcoming vacation to Napa Valley, Mark's son's college acceptances, Helen's new book club. I served and cleared courses, refilled wine glasses, and fetched items from the kitchen while they talked over and around me as if I were part of the furniture. It was during dessert, my homemade tres leches cake alongside Helen's store-bought pumpkin pie, that Patricia made her announcement. David, we've been talking, and we think it's time we brought back the old family traditions. You know, the ones from when we were kids. David looked up from his cake with interest. What did you have in mind? Well, for starters, we should go back to having Thanksgiving at Mother's house next year. This. She gestured vaguely around our dining room. It's lovely, but it doesn't feel like family Thanksgiving, you know. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. What do you mean? Patricia's smile was sugar-sweet and venomous. Oh, Maria, don't take it personally. It's just that we grew up with certain traditions. Certain foods, certain ways of doing things. It would be nice to get back to our roots. Our roots, Helen echoed approvingly. There's something to be said for keeping things authentic. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Authentic. As if my grandmother's cornbread recipe wasn't authentic. As if the love I poured into every dish wasn't real enough for their sophisticated palates. I think Maria's done an amazing job, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was already considering it, I could tell. The idea of going back to his childhood home, being surrounded by pure nostalgia without any of the complications that came with building new traditions. Of course she has, Patricia said quickly. She tries so hard. It's just, wouldn't it be nice to have a traditional Thanksgiving again? Just family. Just family. There it was, laid out plainly. After 12 years, I still wasn't family. I looked around the table at these people who had spent the afternoon in my home, eating my food, enjoying my hospitality. People I had welcomed, supported, and cared for through job losses, breakups, financial troubles, and family crises. People who now sat in my grandmother's dining room and calmly informed me that I wasn't authentic enough for their traditions. Something broke inside me then. Not my heart, that had been cracking slowly for years. What broke was my willingness to make myself smaller so they could feel bigger. I stood up. You're absolutely right, Patricia, I said, my voice steady and clear. This isn't your family's traditional Thanksgiving. The conversation stopped. All 22 faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to alarm. This is my family's traditional Thanksgiving. In my family's house. Built with my grandmother's money and filled with my grandmother's love. I walked to the head of the table, where David sat frozen with his fork halfway to his mouth. In my family's tradition, the person who cooks the meal gets to carve the turkey. The person who opens their home gets to sit at the head of their own table. The person who spends 3 days preparing everything gets to be thanked, not tolerated. Helen's mouth fell open. Maria, what are you? I'm being authentic, Helen. Would you like to see what authentic looks like in the Santos family? I reached across David and picked up the carving knife he had never actually used. The turkey, my turkey, cooked with my grandmother's blend of herbs and spices, sat on the platter like a golden centerpiece of everything I had given to this family. Abuela Rosa came to this country with nothing, I said, beginning to carve precise, perfect slices. She worked 3 jobs so she could buy this house and give her family a place to belong. She taught me that hospitality is sacred, that feeding people is an act of love, and that no one, gets to make you feel small in your own home. The knife moved through the meat like butter. 12 years of practice had made me an expert at carving turkey, even if no one had ever acknowledged it. She also taught me that love is a verb, not just a feeling. It's showing up, doing the work, making the space. And I have been showing up for this family for 12 years. I placed perfectly carved slices on a fresh platter, arranging them with the same care I had put into everything else. But you know what Abuela Rosa never taught me? She never taught me to accept disrespect in my own home. That's a lesson I'm learning right now. I set the platter in the center of the table and looked directly at Patricia. You want traditional? Here's traditional. In my tradition, guests who insult their host don't get invited back. Patricia's face flushed red. Now wait just a minute. No, you wait. My voice was calm, but it carried the authority of someone who had finally remembered their own power. You sit in my house, eat my food, and question whether I belong here. You whisper about me like I'm not good enough for your precious family traditions. I turned to Helen. You've eaten at my table for 12 years. I've welcomed your friends, your extended family, your book club. I've listened to your stories, laughed at your jokes, and treated you with nothing but respect. And you've spent the entire afternoon talking about what a shame it is that your son married me. Helen opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. I heard you. Both of you. Wondering if I'm even family, talking about how David could have married anyone. Well, he didn't marry anyone. He married me. And I'm not going anywhere. The silence in the room was deafening. David looked like he was trying to disappear into his chair. David, I said, turning to face my husband directly. For 12 years, I've made myself smaller so your family could feel more comfortable. I pretended not to hear their comments, ignored their suggestions about how I could be more traditional, smiled through their stories about all the women they would have preferred you marry. His face went pale. Maria, I didn't know they were saying those things. Yes, you did. My voice was gentle but firm. You've always known. You just chose not to see it because it was easier than dealing with it. I looked around the table one more time at the faces of people who had underestimated me for over a decade. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to finish eating this meal that I prepared in this house that I own. Then you're going to help clean up, because that's what family does. And next year, if you want to have Thanksgiving at Helen's house with your traditional foods and your traditional guest list, you're welcome to do that. I paused, letting that sink in. But understand this, David and I will be having our own Thanksgiving here. Our tradition. Our way. Our family. I smiled, and for the first time in years, it felt completely genuine. And anyone who wants to be part of a family that values respect, gratitude, and authentic love is welcome at our table. The room remained silent for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, David's teenage niece Emma started clapping. That was awesome, Aunt Maria, she said, grinning. Can I come to your Thanksgiving next year? Her younger brother joined in. Me too. Your turkey is way better than Grandma's anyway. Kids. Patricia hissed, but they ignored her. Seriously, Emma continued, I've been listening to this stuff my whole life, and it's so messed up. Aunt Maria is literally the nicest person in our family, and you guys treat her like she's some kind of outsider. Mark cleared his throat uncomfortably. Maybe we should all just. Actually, interrupted David's cousin Jenny, Emma's right. Maria, I owe you an apology. You've been nothing but kind to all of us, and we've been jerks. More voices began to join in. Uncle Bob admitted he'd always looked forward to my cooking more than anyone else's. David's younger brother confessed that he'd never understood why the family was so resistant to change. Even some of Patricia's own children began pushing back against their mother's obvious discomfort. But it was David's response that mattered most. He stood up slowly, his face flushed with what I hoped was shame. Maria's right, he said quietly. About all of it. I have known, and I've been a coward about addressing it. He turned to face his mother and sister. Mom, Patricia, the way you've treated my wife is unacceptable. She's not a guest in our lives, she's family. She's my family. Helen started to protest, but David held up a hand. No, Mom. I've let this go on too long. Maria has been nothing but gracious and welcoming to all of you. She's opened our home, cooked incredible meals, supported everyone in this family through good times and bad times. And in return, some of you have treated her like she's not good enough to be here. He reached for my hand. I'm sorry, Maria. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I'm sorry I let you feel like you had to prove yourself worthy of being in your own home. Patricia's face was stormy. David, you can't seriously be choosing her over your own family. I'm not choosing anyone over anyone, David said firmly. I'm choosing respect. I'm choosing kindness. I'm choosing the values that Maria has been showing all of you for years. The dinner ended quietly after that. Some family members helped clean up, offering genuine apologies and expressing hope that we could start fresh. Others left quickly, clearly uncomfortable with having their behavior called out so directly. Patricia and Helen were among the early departures, both of them tight-lipped and offended. But as they gathered their coats, I heard Helen whisper to David, I hope you know what you're doing. I do, Mom, he replied. For the first time in years, I really do. After everyone left, David and I stood in our kitchen surrounded by clean dishes and leftover food. The house felt different somehow, lighter, more peaceful. I really am sorry, he said again. You shouldn't have had to handle that alone. I wasn't alone, I replied, thinking of Emma's support, of Jenny's apology, of Uncle Bob's admission. And you stood up when it mattered. He pulled me into his arms. Your grandmother would be proud of you. I think she would, I agreed, looking out the window at Rosa's garden. She always said this house was meant to be filled with people who know how to love each other properly. 6 months later, we hosted our first Easter dinner using the same principles I had established at Thanksgiving. Our guest list was smaller but infinitely more meaningful. Emma brought her boyfriend. Jenny contributed her famous deviled eggs. Uncle Bob arrived early to help set up tables. Patricia and Helen were invited, of course. Family is family, and my tradition includes forgiveness alongside accountability. They came, and while the atmosphere was still a bit awkward, they were notably more respectful. Patricia even complimented my tres leches cake and asked for the recipe. More importantly, I started a tradition of my own. Every major holiday, I take a moment to tell the story of Abuela Rosa, how she came to this country with nothing but determination, how she built a life of dignity and respect, how she taught me that love is a verb and hospitality is sacred. The story serves as both inspiration and instruction. A reminder to the people at my table that they're not just eating a meal, they're participating in a legacy of resilience, generosity, and authentic love. And I always end the story the same way, in this house, everyone who shows respect gets respect. Everyone who brings love receives love. And everyone who tries to make someone feel small in their own space gets reminded that this is not that kind of family. David has become my strongest ally in maintaining these standards. He's learned to see microaggressions he used to miss, to speak up when people cross lines he used to ignore. We've both grown in ways that have made our marriage stronger and more honest. But the most important change is in me. I no longer shrink to fit other people's comfort levels. I no longer smile through disrespect or laugh off cruelty disguised as family tradition. I am Rosa Santos's granddaughter, carrying forward her legacy of strength, dignity, and radical hospitality. I am Maria Santos Mitchell, a woman who knows her worth and insists that others recognize it too. And every time I carve the turkey in my own home, surrounded by people who genuinely want to be there, I remember that moment when everything changed. The moment I stopped being help and started being myself. If you've made it this far in my story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own life? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity? Please share your experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear about the moments when you stood up for yourself, when you chose authenticity over acceptance, when you remembered your own worth. And if this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. We're here to remind people that you don't have to make yourself smaller to make others comfortable. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is carve the turkey in your own house. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply refusing to be treated as less than you are. That Thanksgiving taught me that belonging isn't something other people give you, it's something you claim for yourself. And once you claim it, once you really own your worth and your space and your right to be respected, everything changes. Not everyone will like it. Some people are comfortable with dynamics where they get to be the deciders of who belongs and who doesn't. But the people who matter, the people who truly love you, will respect your boundaries and rise to meet your standards. That's the difference between family and relatives, between hospitality and servitude, between tradition and stagnation. In my grandmother's house, we choose love that looks like respect. We choose traditions that include everyone at the table. We choose authenticity over keeping the peace. And we always remember, the person who opens their home and their heart gets to carve the turkey.